Tonight, I want to talk about addiction to grief. We don't usually associate addiction with the grieving process when someone we love dies, but the truth of the matter is that we can become addicted in varying ways. I think that the major reason that we do become addicted or get stuck in the grieving process is because the worldview of Western culture does not allow us to move beyond that deep sorrow of total loss. We all know that the scientific materialistic view in the Western world is that we are a fluke of nature, that our whole process of being and developing is random, and that there is nothing but matter, and that we are without meaning and without purpose. Could we wonder why someone might get stuck in the grieving process when we have that worldview? But let's take it from a different perspective. I love the perspective of Haridas Chowdhury when he says that we need a worldview that shows us how our deepest aspirations are connected to the essential structure of the universe. Love itself is an essential structure of the universe, and it flows through us. And when we love, we want to be present with the beloved. We want to nurture the other person's growth and development. We want to share our joys and our sorrows, and we want to do everything we can to nurture a creative relationship. Well, what then is grief? Grief is the other side of love. We could never grieve if we didn't love. And I like to think of grief as love when it is confronted with the absence of the physical form of the person we loved. Now, if we take the worldview of Western culture that there's nothing but the physical form, there's no way we can really heal. We can be noble and carry on, but that isn't a healing of the soul. That isn't a healing of the human psyche, and it isn't a healing of our culture. But if we take Chowdhury's view, in which the love that we feel is actually coming from the essential structure of the universe that flows through us, and grief as the other side of love, then we will be able to heal, because what happens when we actually enter into this flow or this continuum of energy of love and grief is that grief will pull our attention, focus our attention on the beloved, and it will move us into a connection to its essence, to its spiritual form in the spiritual universe. In other words, we could say that grief is a sacred energy, just as love is a sacred energy, because it invites us into the mystery school of the meaning of death. And once we know through our own experience what the meaning of death is, we become transformed. And in the ancient world, I've spoken so many times about the mystery schools, and we don't have so many mystery schools today, although some are developing here and there, and that's a wonderful thing. But when someone we love dies, life itself invites us to be initiated into the mystery of death, which is an initiation into the meaning of life. We come to know that there is no death, that birth and death are events in time and space, and that the essence that was born and created itself into physical form returns to that spiritual essence, and that when that person dies, that love can pull our attention and our energies into the spiritual universe once again, and we can remember who we are and know that we can never be separated from the one we love, because there can be no separation where there is love. Well, how do we get stuck then? Mainly because we don't know these things in our culture so easily, when we have a culture that has denied and rejected and repressed the very techniques or methods of connecting to that other dimension of reality. Even though we live in a world that has taught us and programmed us to believe in nothingness, I think that our generations today are the ones who are being called to make this change, to transform the worldview. Many people all over the world are experiencing this initiation into the mystery of death, and they are sharing their experiences with others. So even though we live in a world that does not give us the techniques or the guidelines, where can we find them? First of all, we can find them within ourselves, because Chaudhary is correct. Our deepest aspirations will guide us. Our deep aspiration is to be connected with the person we love, who is now no longer in physical form. I don't know if there can be a greater aspiration than to be connected to love. If we follow that aspiration, I do think that we will begin to experience that it is the aspiration of the universe itself. But today, we have other possibilities. There are wonderful organizations, and I might mention here Forever Family Foundation, formed by Bob and Fran Ginsberg, who have done wonderful work in helping people to understand modern scientific research that actually would support the continuation of consciousness, and also the many methods of getting in touch with the spirit world. But there are other organizations and other people who are doing research and writing, and there are so many ways that we can go outside ourselves and find out how we might make closer and deeper and better contact with the beloved in the spiritual world. But let's think just for a moment, how do we get stuck in ways that maybe aren't a direct result of the emptiness of our scientific materialistic worldview? Well, when we get older, we lose the community or the communities that we have lived in and worked in and created in, and that makes it harder. It makes it harder, I think, very often the older we get, because we have fewer of the friends of a lifetime, and perhaps the community, and perhaps we're not in our profession anymore where we're seeing people every day and perhaps being able to be of service to others. I found when the deaths came in my family that the communities that I had in various places were so healing to me. They pulled me out of myself, and my students were wonderful because we could continue to participate in a creative process. I could continue to be of service in whatever way I was able to be, as they were to me. And when we lose those, it's difficult. And I think that it's very important to separate these situations that vary in different times in our lives from the actual mystery school of death, because we need to deal with them. For example, another situation that we can be involved in when someone we love dies is that we can have a terrible guilty feeling about something that either we did do or that we didn't do. That guilt needs to be understood as a separate issue that we personally need to work through as we are being pulled into the essence of the one we love in the spiritual dimension. These are the things here and now that we need to work with. How we deal with the absence of community, how we deal with old age and perhaps feeling as though we don't have the energy to actually do this, or to actually get out and be of service to others, because that always helps us to deal with our own situation, whatever it is. Sometimes there are just too many losses, and a person has difficulty in that way. Sometimes, of course, the death is associated with a great deal of violence, and I think we have to deal with our connection and relationship with those surrounding issues on a personal level, so that we can be free to flow with this energy of love and grief and actually be transformed by it. Let's just think just for a minute what happens when we do get stuck. We've probably all seen people who are stuck, and we don't tend to stay around them very often, for very long. One of the major characteristics of getting stuck is that the person talks about his or her loss all the time. That's the only thing that can be focused on. And it stays at the same place with the same perspective. And the interesting thing is that they can't hear other people's losses. I can remember that when my son and my husband died, and it was the first Christmas without both of them, I had to go to the grocery store, and when I was there, I was confronted by a woman who was in deep grief. And she talked to me about her grief and the loss of her child. And I listened to her for quite a while, and I wanted to comfort her, really, in a way of saying, I do understand that because I have just lost my child and my husband. And the interesting thing is she never heard me. She never heard me. She continued to talk about her own loss. That's all she could talk about, all she could see or feel. And that's a very dangerous thing for the person, because if we can't go outside ourselves, we can never allow ourselves to be healed and realize that we're all in this together, because birth and death are happening all the time to all of us. Such a person would usually feel herself or himself to be a victim, and requires attention and an audience. That woman confronted me in the grocery store because she needed an audience. She needed to keep talking about her loss. And I understand that, and that is important, but we can't stay at the same place. And if we do talk about it, we need to be open to receive what our listener can tell us too. And that is an opening. That's a door out of our stuckness. Such people often feel, and one understands how one can get there, that they are entitled to a continual attention and sympathy. That doesn't heal them either. Certainly the attention and the sympathy are healing in the process, but if we allow it to be something that we expect all the time and can't allow it to give us the energy to get into the flow of the process, then it will be detrimental to us. This, of course, alienates us from others. It prevents us from having relationships with others, and the grief itself then becomes our identity. So these are the kinds of things that, of course, we want to avoid. And sometimes we can try so hard to avoid getting stuck that we move too quickly through the grief and don't allow grief's full expression within ourselves and our lives. Grief is an energy frequency that has an intention. Its intention is the same as love, except its intention, instead of focusing on the physical form, it will move us to its essence, to the spiritual form, to that essential structure of the universe as we experience through the person we love. It is a powerful, perhaps the most powerful experience we will ever have. Could there be anything truly more powerful than love? That is the key in the heart of the universe.